Imagine walking down Broadway today, right above the R and W lines, oblivious to the fact that a Victorian time capsule is bricked up just inches from your feet. In 1870, decades before the official NYC Subway even existed, 400,000 people were already gliding through a secret tunnel in a car powered by nothing but air. It had frescoed walls, a grand piano, and a goldfish fountain. A high-tech utopia built in total secrecy at night to hide from a corrupt government. It worked perfectly, the public loved it, and then it was erased. For 42 years, it sat in total darkness, a perfectly preserved ghost waiting for passengers who never came, until workers accidentally smashed through a wall and stood frozen in disbelief. Why was the most advanced transit system in history buried alive? Why did the city wait 34 more years to build what they already had? And why, when it was finally rediscovered, did the evidence mysteriously vanish? This isn't just a story about a train. It's a window into a pattern of suppressed innovation that is still happening today. I wasn't looking for suppressed technology when I started researching 19th century transit, but the numbers didn't make sense. By the 1860s, New York City was a claustrophobic nightmare. 700,000 people were crammed into lower Manhattan. The streets were an open sewer of horse manure, soot, and chaos where a single mile could take an hour to cross. London already had an underground by 1863, so why was New York, the richest city on earth, stuck in the mud until 1904? The answer wasn't a lack of money or engineering. The answer was a man named Alfred Ely Beach. Beach wasn't a conspiracy theorist. He was the editor of Scientific American and a brilliant patent lawyer. He saw the chaos from his office window and knew the solution was beneath the ground. But he also knew something more dangerous. The men who ran New York, the infamous Boss Tweed and his Tammany Hall machine, made their millions from the chaos. They owned the horse car lines and the elevated rail contracts. A clean, efficient subway was a threat to their pocketbooks. So, Beach decided to do the unthinkable. He decided to build a subway in secret. He applied for a permit to build pneumatic mail tubes, small pipes for letters. Under the cover of that lie, he rented a clothing store basement at Broadway and Warren Street, directly across from City Hall. For 58 nights, his men dug by lantern light. They didn't use shovels. Beach invented a massive hydraulic tunneling shield, a masterpiece of engineering that pushed through the earth without disturbing the surface. They carted the dirt out in the dead of night like criminals, but they weren't stealing. They were inventing the future. When he finally opened the doors in February 1870, the world gasped. It wasn't a dark tunnel. It was a palace. Zircon lights illuminated a waiting room that looked like a billionaire's mansion. And then there was the car, a cylindrical masterpiece that fit the tunnel like a piston in a cylinder. There was no smoke, no steam, no horses. Just a giant 48-ton blower called the Western Tornado that used air pressure to push the car at 10 miles per hour. It was silent. It was elegant. It was impossible. But as the public cheered, the shadows of Tammany Hall began to close in. The establishment didn't care that it worked. They cared that they didn't own it. This was the moment the war for the future of New York truly began. A war fought with vetoes, lawsuits, and eventually, a convenient silence that lasted for over a century. The success of the Beach pneumatic transit wasn't just a public marvel. It was a declaration of war against the status quo. While 400,000 New Yorkers marveled at the Western Tornado, blowing their car through the dark, William Boss Tweed was watching from City Hall with cold calculation. You have to understand that in 1870, New York wasn't run by laws, it was run by kickbacks. Tweed's machine, Tammany Hall, had its hands in every pocket of the city's infrastructure. They controlled the horse-drawn omnibus lines that clogged the streets and were deep in negotiations for expensive, noisy elevated railways. A silent, efficient, and, most importantly, privately funded subway meant Tweed couldn't skim millions off the top. So, the machine did what machines do, it jammed the gears of progress. For 4 consecutive years, Alfred Beach walked into the state capital of Albany with a bill to expand his tiny 312-foot demonstration into a citywide network. And for 4 years, he was met with a wall of stone. In 1871 and 1872, Beach actually managed to get his expansion bills passed by both houses of the legislature through sheer public pressure. But Governor John Hoffman, a man whose political career was bought and paid for by Tweed, vetoed them both. The excuse was technicalities, but the reality was a message. If the machine doesn't get its cut, the city doesn't get its future. As the legal battles dragged on, the propaganda war began. Wealthy property owners along Broadway, led by titans like John Jacob Astor, were coached to file lawsuits. They claimed that Beach's air-powered tubes would shake the very foundations of New York's buildings, causing the city to collapse into the earth. It was a lie designed to generate fear, the same kind of fear used today to stall transformative technology. Beach fought back in the pages of Scientific American, proving the safety of his hydraulic shield, but logic is a weak weapon against a rigged system. Then, in 1873, the impossible happened. The Tweed ring collapsed under the weight of its own greed. Boss Tweed was arrested, and for a brief moment, the air in New York felt clear. The new governor, John Dix, finally signed Beach's bill. Full authorization. 5 miles of track from Battery Park to Central Park. Beach had won. He had the permits, the public support, and the proven tech. But 3 weeks later, the trap snapped shut. Not by a politician, but by the financial system itself. On September 18, 1873, the banking giant J. Cook and Company declared bankruptcy. This wasn't just a bank failure. It was the spark that ignited the Panic of 1873, the Great Depression of its time. The very railroads that had lobbied against Beach's Subway were the ones whose speculative bubble burst, taking the entire economy with them. Overnight, Beach's investors vanished. Capital froze. In a city suddenly starving and unemployed, a futuristic subway became a luxury no one would fund. Beach was forced to make a heartbreaking decision. He couldn't pay the rent on the basement, and he couldn't get the loans to dig. He didn't tear it down, he simply stopped. He walked out of that elegant waiting room, with its frescoes and its piano, and ordered the entrance to be bricked up. He didn't just seal a tunnel, he sealed a miracle. For the next 23 years, Beach lived as a ghost of his own ambition, watching New York descend further into transit chaos, knowing the solution was sitting perfectly preserved, silent and dark, directly beneath the feet of the people complaining about the traffic. He died in 1896, 2 years before a fire at the Rogers Peet building supposedly destroyed the upper entrance to his dream. The world moved on, and the name Alfred Ely Beach began to fade from the history books, as if the city was trying to forget the man who proved they didn't have to suffer. For nearly 4 decades, the Beach pneumatic transit existed only as a rumor, a ghost story told by elderly engineers. But in February 1912, the ghost finally decided to appear. Workers for the Degnan Contracting Company were excavating for the new BMT Broadway line when their jackhammers struck a wall that shouldn't have been there. They broke through the brickwork and stepped into a nightmare of preservation. There, in the dry, warm air beneath Broadway, was Alfred Beach's dream, perfectly intact. The car still sat on its tracks, its plush upholstery dusty but present. The tunneling shield, the very machine that had birthed the first American subway, was still plugged into the far end of the tunnel, as if it had only paused for a lunch break 40 years earlier. It was a miracle of engineering, a physical proof that New York's transit misery had been unnecessary for an entire generation. They photographed it, documented the luxury of the waiting room, and even found the remains of the piano. But then, something chilling happened. Instead of preserving this monument to innovation, the city ordered its total destruction. The car was broken apart. The tunnel was ripped open to make way for the modern subway lines we use today. The tunneling shield, a priceless artifact of human genius, was reportedly donated to Cornell University, only for the university to later claim they had lost track of its whereabouts. One of the most significant engineering milestones in history simply vanished into thin air. Once you see this pattern, you can't unsee it. We are taught that history is a straight line of progress, where the best technology always wins. But the story of Alfred Beach proves that history is written by the people who own the present. The pneumatic subway didn't fail because it didn't work. It failed because it worked too well for the wrong people. Today, we stand on congested highways and wait for delayed trains, being promised that one day we will have high-speed vacuum tubes or hyperloops. The media treats these as futuristic dreams, Yet we have photographic proof that we had them in 1870. We are being sold the same innovation 150 years later, repackaged as something new because the original version was buried to protect a corrupt machine. This is the secret subway effect, a cycle where technology is suppressed, the inventor is forgotten, and the evidence is destroyed, only for the same idea to be reinvented when it finally serves the interests of those in power. Somewhere beneath Broadway, the N and our trains still rumble through the space where Beach's tunnel once stood. His work was literally incorporated into the new system, its bones becoming the foundation for the very city that tried to erase him. There is no grand memorial for Beach. No plaque marks the spot where 400,000 people once glimpsed a future they weren't allowed to keep. The question we are left with isn't just about what happened in 1870. The question is, what is being suppressed right now? What working technology are we being told is impossible or too expensive, simply because it threatens a modern-day boss tweed? The tunnel may be gone, but the gatekeepers are still there. And as long as we keep forgetting our history, we are doomed to keep waiting for a future that was already built a century ago.